Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey has finally arrived in theatres, and after watching the film multiple times already, I think that the director's new film is a cinematic masterpiece. The director has effortlessly combined large and intimate filmmaking in his new mythical epic, and when I think of the majority of the elements across the board, whether it be the performances, the story, the cinematography, the score, and so on, it delivers on nearly all fronts. Having read different translations of Homer's epic poem, I also dug a lot of the cinematic creative changes to make this work for a large-scale adaptation today. So in this video, I'm going to be listing all the reasons why I think The Odyssey is a new cinematic masterpiece from director Christopher Nolan. This video essay will contain spoilers, so if you do happen to be someone who hasn't seen the film yet, then I would recommend watching this video after you've seen it, or you can also check out my spoiler-free review, which I posted the other day. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my upcoming content for Christopher Nolan's latest film, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, here's why I believe that The Odyssey is a modern classic. So with all the crazy discussions around Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey over the last few months, I put all of that aside and just went into this film ready to judge it as its own adaptation. Having now seen the film twice, I think this may be the biggest accomplishment in the director's filmography to date. As I said in my initial spoiler-free review the other day, what really becomes striking as you watch The Odyssey unfold is the way its enormous, almost overwhelming scale is constantly balanced by something far more intimate and human. For all the spectacle that Nolan puts on screen, the film is at its most powerful when it narrows its focus and becomes deeply personal through a story about loss, about the almost spiritual pull of returning home, or the simmering drive towards vengeance that shapes every choice that Odysseus makes. Following in the footsteps of a film like Oppenheimer, there's the same blend of despair and fragile hope running throughout this film. But Nolan guides all of this through a focus on Zeus's law, the simple but foundational principle insisting that we treat others as we wish to be treated. It's the moral glue that allows civilization to function, and everyone is vulnerable to either the kindness or the cruelty of those they encounter. Nolan frames this ancient truth as something universal in his film, something that still matters in the modern world, and that's precisely why the ending of The Odyssey feels so relatable. It's these ideas, which are drawn straight from Homer, that suddenly feel alive again. For one, Odysseus is a fascinating contrast to Oppenheimer, as Oppie's descent was driven by a blinding passion to complete his mission and save the world, and that eventually led him to have a viewpoint that was quite doomful come the very final moments. In a similar way, Odysseus' journey continues to consume him long after the siege of Troy. There are terrible acts that were committed, but it's how he carries that darkness with him and lets it torment him in every step of his journey home. In Nolan's telling, Odysseus becomes a man haunted by war, and he's a figure who can't escape that past. But where the director takes this all a step further is through how he delivers thematically with the film's ending. Now, as many have said, the ending of this film really does leave an impact, and I think it might be one of my favourite endings in a Christopher Nolan film. Odysseus chooses exile as a kind of self-imposed punishment for slaughtering the suitors. He knows their families will be furious, echoing the fallout that was also described in Homer's epic, and he refuses to let that violence spark another cycle of revenge on his homeland. Odysseus' reluctance to return home comes from what he witnessed in Troy's fall through the brutality, the innocent lives lost, and the knowledge that his own stratagem in the Trojan horse made that destruction possible. With war threatening to rise again by the very end, he feels responsible for whatever darkness might come out of it. He and his men might have also been the sea people that are mentioned throughout the film who were foretold to bring ruin to civilization. But in Nolan changing the ending and also adding the Athena twist in there, it has provided more layers to all that emotion. And that's through having the face of Athena, who appeared throughout his journey, be his own projection. It turns out to be the face of a young woman that Odysseus saw die during the sacking of Troy. Her image has followed him ever since, becoming a living reminder of the horror that he helped unleash. Nolan uses this reveal to reframe his entire story, potentially suggesting that the gods might not be guiding Odysseus and that his trauma might be the thing that has actually guided him. But on the flip side to this idea and tying in Zeus's law, a stranger might be anyone, even a god in disguise. So this elevates everything because you really connect to a man who doesn't know what to believe, and you wonder whether the future will actually repeat the brutality of the past or whether we have any say in that. Just take the Scylla and Charybdis scene towards the end of the journey narrative as an example, and how that frames a somewhat broken Odysseus who knows his men will die regardless of the route he takes. Another thing I love about what the ending communicates, and this touches on the Oppenheimer point I made before, is that Nolan doesn't end the movie letting you feel like all hope is lost. Odysseus and Penelope sail west together and they leave Telemachus to rule Ithaca. The director essentially chose an emotional and reflective path, one that is filled with regret, but one that also feels satisfying and has a touch of hope to it. Odysseus seems to be heading off to bury his fallen crew and is seeking closure to all his grief in the unknown west. And if he has no say in his path going forward, at least he is trying to atone for those mistakes. His final words in saying that civilization will rise again show that he does have a level of optimism for what's ahead. By removing himself from Ithaca, Odysseus gives his people the space to heal, and he finally begins to heal himself. So by the ending of this adaptation, Nolan hasn't simply adapted Homer, he has entered into a dialogue with him across nearly 3,000 years. Like Odysseus himself, the journey has left behind a few regrets, ghosts, and wounds that never fully heal. But it leaves you with an irresistible urge to set sail again and to chase a new Odyssey. The ending in Homer's poem is one that is considered to be quite polarizing, often leaving readers and scholars feeling underwhelmed or confused by its abruptness. There are so many things that happen, and it ultimately feels quite rushed. So Nolan had to make a big statement come the end of his film and leave you thinking about the central messages and themes that this story takes on. And in my opinion, he did that in flying colours. To get towards that ending though, there were many moments throughout the film where I simply had my jaw on the floor, amazed by how Christopher Nolan and his team have brought certain sequences to life with all the filmmaking. One of the most striking things about The Odyssey is how fully Nolan commits to practical effects and clever in-camera techniques, creating a world that feels tactile and almost shockingly immersive. You feel as though you've been dropped directly into some of these scenes, surrounded by the elements and the sheer physicality of them. It reminded me a bit of Dunkirk in certain moments, and several sequences push all the way into a sense of horror, capturing moments that feel deeply unsettling in a way that lingers long after the scene ends. There's the Circe sequence, where instead of leaning into the seductive tension and the year-long wait that is traditionally associated with her and Odysseus in Homer's poem, Nolan drives the scene straight into a moment of pure horror. The transformation of Odysseus's crew in an almost substance kind of way is staged with an intensity that feels both shockingly real and physical. We get Samantha Morton as Circe sculpting the faces and bodies of Odysseus's men into pigs, resulting in a moment that feels grotesque and is executed with a level of craftsmanship that makes you genuinely question how they pulled it off. But moments like this aren't just there to terrify you. You get Circe's motivations for why she does what she does, and then you also see the growing exhaustion in Odysseus, who just wants to get him and his men home. There's a common ground formed between the two of them come the end of the scene, resulting in Circe's release of his men. The other creature scenes in The Odyssey are also a perfect example of how Nolan uses restraint-driven horror, the kind that doesn't remove you from the film or make the moments look overproduced. Scylla is only shown in fragments, and it's the classical monster approach you see in films like Jaws, where keeping the creature out of full view makes the threat feel heavier and far more frightening. Nolan then uses a similar technique with the sirens, as we only see them from a distance, but we then witness their impact on the scene. Odysseus is strapped to the mast and is fighting the pull of their song, which he says tells him all the promises he failed to keep. The horror in these scenes comes from putting the seed in our imagination and from what the scene is trying to show us about character. Rather than just the explicit depiction of large-scale sequences, there's a sense of grief for Odysseus personally, and then the suggestion of all the danger that the crew faces within that. It's clever filmmaking, and it works in different ways for each of the fantastical sequences. And all of this circles back to the filmmaking itself. For one, the cinematography is deeply effective, and Nolan and Hoyte van Hoytema find a way to put you on the boat and up close with Odysseus and his men. Yes, there are grand and sweeping compositions in the film, but during moments like the Cyclops scene, the Scylla scene, the Siege of Troy, or even the Circe sequence, you feel very close to Odysseus and his men. And that approach allows them to block certain things in a clever way and then make you feel like you're experiencing the grief and tension that they go through. And not to mention Ludwig Göransson's score, which supplements all the grandeur and emotion at the same time. The ancient Greek instruments and modern synthesizers that he uses evoke an authentic Bronze Age atmosphere. It has a bit of everything in there, whether it be the thumping tension of the Trojan Horse sequence or the more emotive Odysseus theme that plays at different moments throughout. This brings me on to some of the great performances in the Odyssey and how some of the scenes featuring certain actors really help elevate their characters on screen. I have to start with Odysseus himself, as Matt Damon plays him both as a man celebrated for his wartime brilliance, yet visibly scarred by it. In a film filled with mythic creatures, transformations, and towering monsters, Damon's performance keeps the story emotionally grounded, and as touched on, he brings a human weight and sincerity that makes even the fantastical elements feel anchored in real experience. The scenes that stood out to me were his quieter moments, particularly those with Charlize Theron's Calypso, which dig into how avoidance and denial feed post-traumatic stress. It was almost like the dream scenes from Inception between Cobb and Moll. Damon shapes his Odysseus into a layered, conflicted figure who, despite his failures, is able to earn the audience's empathy. And then by the final act, Damon reaches the peak of his performance. His monologue to Anne Hathaway's Penelope is devastating, capturing a man crushed by what he's done and what he can't undo. It's the kind of moment that will likely get him in next year's Oscar race, and it stands among the strongest work that the actor has ever delivered. Speaking of Penelope, Anne Hathaway's performance was another one that stood out to me on rewatch. Her performance as Penelope manages to convey both the strength of a queen without losing all the emotional layers that arise at every moment. And I noticed that she uses small expressions and gestures in some of these moments that I think speak much louder than any of the dialogue that she delivers. In particular, a moment that I loved was the one between her and Odysseus in the flashback towards the very start of the film, and her performance there gave me similar feels to the scene between Murph and Cooper back in Interstellar. During this scene, Nolan expertly frames the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter, and it becomes a dark prologue to the entire tragedy that follows. We see how Agamemnon's doomed homecoming becomes a cautionary parallel to Odysseus' tense return to Penelope. After Odysseus outlines all of that and says to Penelope that he might not come back, Hathaway communicates her sense of heartbreak in such a strong and emotional way. The other performances that stood out to me in the film were John Leguizamo's loyal Eumaeus, and particularly the moment he denies a sense of hope once Odysseus does come back to him as the beggar. There's also the moments with Robert Pattinson's Antinous, like the one of realization once Odysseus gives him the peg and strings his famous bow. And there's also Tom Holland's more subtle coming-of-age portrayal as Telemachus, as he tries to show a sense of strength but cannot hold back his feelings in particular moments. Think of the scene between him and Menelaus during the retelling of the Siege of Troy. From start to finish though, the film is full of emotionally effective scenes and performances that make a story that could have felt at a distance feel much closer. Now, even though I love this movie on most levels, I do think there is a minor issue in the first act. It's not something that necessarily makes the movie bad or derails it at all, it's just something that I think could have been changed to elevate the opening of Nolan's new film. For me, the place where I think the Odyssey stumbles a little, and this might be the reason I put it slightly behind Oppenheimer, Inception, and The Dark Knight on my Nolan ranking, is in the pacing and structure of the opening 30 minutes. Nolan is known for launching his films with a momentum and a kind of immediate focus with his first acts that grab you by the collar and set the tone with absolute confidence. Here, I think the beginning doesn't quite reach that same level of impact, and I think there are a few reasons for that. Number one, he's got so much to introduce from Homer's epic poem and even stuff from the Iliad, and I found that the movie jumps around quite a bit at the start to lay that groundwork. We get the intro with Sinon and the Trojan Horse, which I thought was going to lead straight into the Siege of Troy. But then we get all the stuff in Ithaca, many different flashbacks, and then even the introduction with Odysseus on Calypso's island. Now yes, in the poem there is a lot of the same jumping around over the first half of it, but I thought he would have found a way to streamline that to ease the audience in. In short, I think it could have been a bit smoother, both in an editorial point of view and then through the way it lays out certain character and narrative beats. But number 2, this point links into the first one in that I genuinely think the Siege of Troy scene that we get 45 minutes into the movie should have opened the whole thing. Nolan could have still returned to that sequence to reveal other information that we do get in the film, like the reveal with Athena at the very end, or to moments before it with the sacrifice of Ithaca. But I feel like having that 10 minutes of tension and action of the siege at the very beginning, an important moment that frames everything in the timelines that follow it, could have really helped with the pacing and storytelling in the opening act. We essentially go 40 minutes with a lot of dialogue scenes and introductory narrative beats before we do get to this pivotal moment, and then everything of course clicks into place and picks up. It's just my opinion, and I do think it might have helped with the pacing a little bit and allowed the rest of the narrative and even flashback moments to stuff from the Iliad feel more impactful. But once that minor criticism is set aside, the sheer accomplishment of what Nolan pulls off here becomes undeniable. Nearly everything else in this massive adaptation worked for me, and I think works with a clarity and ambition that feels almost unreal. He manages to preserve what was vital to Homer's story and then shapes it into something that feels newly alive. Homer's tale is incredibly hard to translate to the screen as it's episodic, symbolic, and built on encounters that shift wildly in tone and meaning. And yet Nolan sculpts it into a format that feels cinematic, unified, and purposeful. I think it's hard to imagine anyone executing this material better for a large-scale event film today. So overall, I think that The Odyssey is nothing short of a mesmerising achievement and a piece of filmmaking that feels gargantuan in its scale, yet startlingly intimate in its emotional reach. It's the kind of film that reminds you of how rare it is for a director to operate at this level, balancing moments of spectacle with soul in a way that feels almost impossible. Christopher Nolan has somehow taken one of the oldest stories ever told and infused it with a clarity, a force, and a cinematic urgency that makes it feel brand new. The cast delivers performances that feel weighty without ever losing their humanity, grounding a story that could have easily felt at a distance. And then every epic set piece in the film carries the immeasurable weight that you'd expect from Nolan, but done so in a way that makes you feel the consequences of those sequences. The battles, the storms, and the encounters with the monsters aren't just there to be thrilling moments, they're harrowing and they leave emotional bruises that echo throughout the rest of the story. It's surprisingly one of Nolan's most emotionally punishing works, and not because of its violence, but because of the way it confronts the aftermath of the violence through themes of trauma, regret, and cost. Nolan isn't simply retelling a myth, he's engaging with it across time and reminding us why these stories endure, why they still matter, and why cinema, when it's at its most ambitious, can take something written thousands of years ago and make it feel urgent and contemporary. It presents a dialogue across millennia about fate, suffering, homecoming, and the fragile threads that hold civilization together. For me, this film isn't just an adaptation, it's a reminder that even across thousands of years, these stories can still speak to who we are, what we fear, and what we hope to become. But that was my video discussing why I believe that Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is a cinematic masterpiece. It's my favourite film of the year so far, and I think for many over time, it's going to be one of Christopher Nolan's best works brought to the big screen. It's a thrilling cinematic experience that is visually powerful and thought-provoking in all the best of ways. I gave the movie a 9.5 out of 10 in my spoiler-free review the other day, and at this moment in time, I'm sticking with that rating. And I'm interested to see how the film will compare after rewatching it even more over time. But let me know down below in the comment section what you thought of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey movie, alongside whether you agree with the points I have raised in this video. I will be doing more breakdowns and topical videos on the film, including a biggest questions video in the next few days. For much more videos and breakdowns, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.